Recently, my mother and stepfather were arrested, and I am facing intense anger from her parents about this fact. They were arrested because I reported them to the police. I had a legitimate reason for doing this. My relationship with my mother worsened after my father passed away 10 years ago. I am currently 17 years old and will be going to college in a few months. I understood early on that my mother would not save money for my future. Therefore, I started working at the age of 10, took various jobs, and have been saving for the past 4 years. As a result, I have managed to save about $7,000 to date, all thanks to my own efforts. Additionally, I have received cash gifts from relatives on birthdays and holidays, which I always saved. The cash was hidden at home, stored in a wooden box my father had made for me. Since my mother would not allow me to open a bank account, I managed my savings this way. However, someone discovered this hidden savings, and a few days ago, I realized that the box was empty. When I confronted my mother about it, she told me that my stepfather had used the funds to invest in a new home. The moment I understood what had happened, I felt like I was going to lose my mind. At home, there was a fierce argument between me, my mother, and stepfather, but being 17 years old, I couldn't oppose them and had to compromise. All I could do was lock myself in my room and cry for hours. This was because I had to start over from scratch. I wasn't even sure if I had enough money to buy the necessary items before going to college. I was very disappointed and completely bewildered. That same day, I vowed revenge on them. The reason was that the issue was too significant to ignore. Fortunately, I was able to achieve my revenge. Just 3 days later, they were arrested and began to pay for their crimes. The only problem with this series of events was that my grandparents, who had always supported me before, have come to oppose me. I no longer understand what is happening. My mother remarried a man named Phil, who has been deeply involved in my life for the past few years, and I have hated every moment of it. He is one of the most malicious people I have ever met and deserves to be called an abuser. It may not be physical abuse, but I have definitely been at the receiving end of verbal and emotional abuse. My mother is usually the target of his attacks, but he sometimes unleashes his anger on me, blaming me with whatever words that come to his mind, causing pain to both my mother and me while increasing his anger even further. When he realizes that I don't care, he loses even more reason, and my mother does not defend me. My mother wasn't dating anyone for a while after my father's death, but eventually she started a relationship with Phil. Phil has a 19-year-old daughter from a previous marriage, and she lives with her own mother. At first, he seemed understanding, but soon after they started dating, a major argument occurred. This was the turning point that revealed his true nature. Half a year into their relationship, he began to dominate my mother, and she approved of them living together in our home. He is a careless lazybones. He is foolish and can't hold down a job. He is in his mid to late 30s, careless with money, and often relies on his parents. He always spends more than he earns, receiving money from his parents during arguments with my mother, and living lavishly off my mother during peaceful times. Unfortunately, my mother is not wealthy enough to financially support a partner who desires a luxurious lifestyle. She works as a floor supervisor at a local supermarket and earns a decent income, but it's nowhere near enough for the lifestyle Phil desires. However, this has never been a problem for me. Since I was 14, I have tried to be as independent as possible. I rely on my mother for minimal necessities and have not depended on her financially since I started part-time work. I rarely ask her to buy things for me, and the only things I depend on her for are probably housing and meals. I don't make special requests or ask her to go out. I understand that it's pointless to have such expectations. She has been cold and unaffectionate towards me from the start. From a young age, she has never been warm to me and made me feel unwanted. As I grew older, that feeling turned into a strong conviction. Once my father would stand up for me whenever my mother got a little angry, but after his death, I had to face her alone. and this situation has continued in recent years. The situation worsened when Phil came, but I comforted myself knowing that I would be going to college soon and didn't need to worry about what came next. Currently, the situation is very tough, and there is little hope for improvement. For the first 3 days after my money was stolen, I was very depressed and couldn't do anything in my room. The day after the money was stolen, we had to move to a new home, and even after finishing the necessary work, I didn't speak a word to the 2 people I was living with. For them, not talking to me didn't make the situation worse, and they didn't seem to care. On the 3rd day, my mother said she was having a housewarming party in the evening and urged me to prepare, which made me explode in anger, and I shouted that I couldn't participate in a party for a house purchased with my money. I claimed that they had stolen my money to buy this house. This made my mother very angry. She said I should be happy that we finally have a house of our own, and I had to patiently accept this fact, because according to her, I owe them gratitude since she had raised me up. The reason I couldn't accept this was that raising a child was not her choice but a legal obligation, and she hadn't provided me with any special benefits. Moreover, I felt that the house was too big for the 3 of us, but they chose this housing to impress others by living in a luxurious area and having a spacious space. That day, I was very upset and took an action I usually wouldn't. I decided to contact my paternal grandparents, which was a bit complicated. After my father's death, my paternal grandparents found it painful to stay in touch with the family and had cut off relations. We hadn't communicated for a long time, but I had their contact information, so I decided to reach out to them as a last resort. The reason was that, although I had a better relationship with my maternal grandparents, they remained neutral in this issue. The day my money was stolen, I immediately informed my maternal grandparents of the fact. I believed they would resolve the issue for me after talking to my mother. However, they stated they wanted to support her in purchasing a new home. They were indeed pleased. From a positive perspective, finally owning a home and no longer worrying about monthly rent is certainly an advantage. I was told to view this as a good opportunity, but I felt it was strange. Their reaction was unexpected. They had always supported me and sympathized with me without saying anything to my mother, but this time their attitude was completely different, and I found it hard to understand. I felt very angry towards them and subsequently cut off contact. On the day my mother told me to endure, I contacted my paternal grandparents, hoping to receive support from them. It wasn't clear what that would specifically entail. Following my intuition, I called them, and fortunately they answered. As soon as the call connected, I told them everything that had happened. I understood they were deeply hurt by the loss of their son, my father, and usually preferred to avoid contact. But I explained that if my father were still alive, he would undoubtedly want to support me. I complained that my mother had stolen my savings, making all my hard-earned efforts over the past few years futile. While I could have gone to college, that prospect is now uncertain. When I explained the situation to my grandfather, he said it was causing quite a bit of chaos. Upon further inquiry, he mentioned there was a college fund left for me by my father, and he couldn't understand why I had to save further. This was a new revelation to me. My mother had never spoken about this, and I had never directly asked her. I had assumed that my mother had not saved anything. However, I had completely overlooked the possibility that my father might have arranged something. Despite being aware of his untimely death, I thought he might not have had enough time to do something for me. When my grandparents provided this bit of information, I found it very interesting. At that moment, I was very angry and frustrated, and I asked my grandparents if they could provide any evidence against my mother. They found some documents and said they would send them to me. While waiting for the call, I sat in my room trying to connect all the information. It was clear that my mother and Phil were conspiring against me, and it seemed possible that they had diverted the college funds prepared for me to purchase their new home. I doubted that my mother could afford such an expensive house on her own, and Phil had not been employed for the past 3 months, so I did not believe he had the financial capability. I felt I needed to obtain some evidence and considered reporting to the police after confirming it. Later, my grandparents contacted me and sent photos of documents signed by my mother. The documents stated that the funds left by my father should be used for my college education and a comfortable life. Reading this, I couldn't help but laugh out loud. I had thought my mother was working to improve my life, but now I doubted whether she had signed it to complicate my life instead. In the end, I was furious because my mother had signed the documents. After my father's death, my paternal grandparents had left us alone without saying anything, making me feel abandoned. My mother had never actually been there for me, and I felt that all the actions of my mother and both sets of grandparents were merely an act. Engulfed in their deep grief, my paternal grandparents could not pay attention to me. When I asked them why they had not shown me the important documents, they made a somewhat cliché excuse that they had forgotten about it right after my father's death. In the end, as I grew older, we hardly talked anymore, and they also aged and drifted into oblivion. I couldn't argue with their reasoning and left it at that. However, having obtained decisive evidence, I contacted a police officer who was a friend of my father and sought his help. In the evening, as the housewarming party began, my father's friend, another officer, and a lawyer arrived and arrested my mother and stepfather. They were clearly in breach of their promises. The issue was not just about breaking promises, but about the legal action my mother would face for violating the terms of a contract she had signed years ago. As I explained the situation to the guests at the party, they were finally arrested. This was one of the most significant moments of my life when my integrity was proven. They were arrested at a time when they were trying to make a good impression in front of many people, such as former colleagues and friends. The moment my mother and Phil were exposed and arrested, everyone was completely astonished, yet they still acted arrogantly and glared at me as if I were the villain. My maternal grandparents were also at the party and were extremely shocked to see their daughter handcuffed and taken away, refusing to talk to me afterward. They probably couldn't understand what was happening. It seemed unlikely that the money I originally had would be returned, and I felt that anything I did would be in vain. The house documents were in the names of Phil and his daughter, which had nothing to do with me. I considered selling the house and legally forcing them to pay compensation, but I would need to sue them for that, and I currently do not have the funds. I am grateful to my father's friends who made great efforts to help me. My mother and Phil were eventually sent to prison. They couldn't accept their situation and no longer tried to contact me. This is very frustrating. Now, I feel deeply isolated, and although I have won against my mother and Phil in the short term, I may have made significant sacrifices in the long run. I have no clear idea how to proceed. I feel completely powerless. When they were being arrested, my mother and Phil tried to stop me to talk, but I had no desire to speak with them and quickly left the scene. I called a taxi and headed straight home. However, I had been staying at a friend's house for the past 3 days. This friend had supported me during my mother's arrest, and now I spend my days with his father, a lawyer, trying to find a fair resolution. During our conversations, I feel the need for financial support to complete my education. My friend's father has offered financial assistance, but I hesitate to accept help from others. It somehow feels unnatural to me. My grandparents still haven't tried to communicate with me. Since I received the photos of the evidence documents, conversations with both sets of grandparents have ceased. I am very disappointed with the current situation. I hope to overcome this situation as soon as possible and go to college. At this moment, that is my only hope. Indeed, my friends are providing genuine support, which is invaluable to me as I have no family to call my own. For now, they are the only ones who truly care about me. Months later, a surprising new fact came to light. A friend sent me information that contradicted what I had believed to be true. To avoid wasting time, I will explain briefly. In fact, my family had been plotting to betray me. Both my paternal and maternal grandparents had been involved in this plan from the beginning. My mother not only used the funds left by my father for personal purposes, but also secured benefits for the rest of the family. When I was 14 or 15 years old, my mother was in close contact with them, and fortunately she had recorded those interactions. As evidence, she provided the police with screenshots of conversations they had carelessly conducted via email. She stated that since she was arrested, others involved should be treated the same. She argued that it was unfair for her to be the only one prosecuted as they continued to conceal the conspiracy against me. Recently, my paternal grandparents talked about the evidence of the documents my mother had signed because their conscience had awakened, and they regretted their actions. Believing I had no funds, I contacted them for support, and they finally decided to disclose the truth to me. They had intended to share this information for a long time, but had been persuaded by my mother and her parents not to speak the truth. The reason was that it would have been disadvantageous for them. They still cannot justify their actions and are likely deeply regretful. Now, I am completely confused and do not know what to believe or how to handle this situation. This is a very serious issue, and I have not even confided in my friends. I feel betrayed, hurt, and angry. Needing to take action, I plan to immediately report this to the police. The next step is to discuss this issue with a trusted friend and ask them to also inform my father, who is a lawyer. After this conversation, we will sit down with an experienced lawyer to plan in detail how to address this issue and how to move forward positively. However, regardless of the obstacles, I am determined to get into college. This year I have reaffirmed my determination for that. I am not planning to give up. I am already prepared to seek the necessary support from my friend's father. I do not plan to pay for my college tuition myself, but I am considering having him co-sign a student loan application. This process is essential for accurately calculating the amount withdrawn from my trust fund. Everyone involved in this case, including my grandparents, not only stole my money but also took away my future dreams and hopes. Therefore, I am demanding that they return the funds I need to live independently and with dignity. During a discussion with my friend's father and a lawyer, they mentioned that while such cases are not uncommon, the despicableness of the actions and the disgust they provoke remain unchanged, and this feels incredibly selfish to me. Therefore, my lawyer and I agree and have devised a strategy to take direct countermeasures. I cannot simply watch them enjoy themselves with my funds. This extremely tough situation is almost certain to arise again, but next time, it is highly likely that everyone, including both sets of grandparents, will participate. Their involvement in the case is clear, and there is no doubt about that fact. This case is likely to go to trial, but until then, I am committed to actively publicizing the facts. The trial lasted 3 months, during which many pieces of evidence were presented and testimonies exchanged. The final verdict was delivered afterward. As a result of a very detailed investigation into my father's estate, it was discovered that my mother and both sets of grandparents had conspired to embezzle an amount reaching approximately $400,000. This figure far exceeded the initial estimates. Included in this amount were payments from life insurance my father had subscribed to and profits from real estate sold in his name. The court not only ordered the full restitution of the embezzled amount, but also decided to add interest and damages. My mother was found guilty of public embezzlement and document forgery and received a 5-year prison sentence. Additionally, she was stripped of her parental rights. Phil was recognized as an accomplice and received a 2-year prison sentence. This included the theft of my savings of $7,000, and additional compensation was imposed on him. Both sets of grandparents were ordered to have their assets frozen and returned, and were given 2 years of probation, with my paternal grandparents being noted for their cooperation with the investigation. As for Phil's daughter, she claimed and submitted evidence that she was unaware of her father's illegal activities. However, the house she lived in was seized and later sold through legal measures. The proceeds from the sale were allocated as funds for my college education. Although this measure could not be legally avoided, a sympathetic view was expressed towards her. as financial support for my college education until my father's estate was fully recovered. My friend's father was able to co-sign a student loan for me. With this support, I was able to concentrate on my studies without financial worries. In fact, through this trial, the law firm I encountered offered me an internship opportunity. Through this opportunity, I became interested in pursuing a career in law and began envisioning a future in the field. This experience has given me a new direction in my professional aspirations. The case was widely covered by local media and garnered empathy and support from many young people. Many had experienced similar harm, and the response led me to start disseminating information through social media and focusing on advocacy for the rights of young people. This became a step that influenced many people and prompted positive changes. The warmest moment came when I was contacted by colleagues who had worked with my father. They shared many stories about his character and the efforts he had made for my future. Hearing these stories allowed me to understand my father's personality from a completely new perspective and feel his influence anew. Although I have become distanced from my birth family, I am open to discovering new bonds and possibilities. The unconditional support from friends and their families, the knowledge gained from the staff at the law firm, and conversations with my father's old friends have brought new hope to my life. These encounters have shown me new goals and directions. The most important lesson learned through the trial is the importance of having the courage to stand up for justice, even if it means losing loved ones. I also learned that true family is not just about blood relations, but connections of the heart. Moving forward in life, I am determined to proceed steadily toward my own goals, never forgetting to be grateful. At my high school graduation, although I was carrying all these experiences, they ended up lightening my heart and allowed me to participate in the ceremony with a positive spirit. Next month, my new college life will begin in a new city. I pledge to never look back and only move forward. I intend to live each day cherishing it, leading a life of pride as my father always wished.